And then it will be my pleasure, or it is my pleasure, to introduce Maggie Tallerman. So let me give you the specs. So she got her PhD in 1987 from the University of Hull. And the title, Mutation and the Syntactic Structure of Modern Colloquial Welsh, from which, if you didn't already know, does suggest that she has in fact worked on Welsh for some time. She has held many prestigious titles, those British professorial titles, which are incomprehensible to us Americans, but very prestigious. First at the University of Durham from 1983 to 2004, and then even more prestigious titles at Newcastle University from 2004 to 2019, and the most luxurious of titles, Professor Emerita from 2019. She has a bunch of books on syntax, language evolution, syntax of Welsh specifically. She has pages and pages of articles, a huge concentration of work on Welsh syntax and Celtic syntax more generally. And basically, if you want to know something about the syntax of Welsh, you just got to talk to Maggie Tallerman. That's just it. She has an intimidating number of presentations, invitations, editorships, and all sorts of things, and there's just a lot of them. And most dear to my heart, she has a bunch of dissertations she's directed, just tons, and is in fact, despite her emerita status, she's still doing dissertations. There's a personal side to all this. If you don't know her, Maggie is just plain awesome. She's just a really nice person. And I don't say that about, because some people aren't. Anyway, but she's just a really good doobie. I think I met her, Diane and I were trying to reconstruct this, at the first FACL event, 20 years ago or whatever. And she and her husband were both presenting and running classes. And we just decided they were just the nicest people. And somewhere in there, she became my friend and she became my sister. So dwi'n falch iawn o gyflwyno fy ffrind am chwaer, Maggie Tallerman.
Oh, diolch yn fawr iawn, diolch yn galon. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen in a second, but thank you very much, Mike. That's cool. I need to apologize. There's going to be a lot of sniveling, I fear, because I've got a cold, and I'll try to minimize the sniveling. So apologies for that. Okay. So let me see if I can make this work. So, how do I get rid of you?
No, we don't see. We only see, the only part you're sharing with us, Maggie, is the handout. So you're good from our perspective.
But the handout is partly covered by.
Not for us. Not for you, yes, but not for us.
Okay, I think I can more or less manage. Yeah, I think I've done that. Yeah, okay. Wait a second. Okay, so I've never done this before either, so apologies for everything that doesn't make sense in terms of a Zoom talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to relatively briefly, I hope, just give a little bit of background on Welsh mutations, the triggering contexts and targets. And then I'm going to just basically show you some cool stuff about mutation in Welsh. And then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about some stuff to do with the definite article and mutation. Okay. So I'm not going to go through any of the definition or the table because I figure that that's not necessary, but it's there for reference. So I guess the first sort of substantive thing is just a quick reminder of the various mutations that you get in Welsh. And this is sort of a typical situation where you've got a bunch of functional elements which trigger different mutations, soft, nasal, aspirate, or no mutation. One thing I probably should say right now is that although it looks like there are 3 different mutations, mutation series, actually soft mutation is by far out and away and the predominant mutation, and it tends to kind of colonize into the other mutations, so certainly in colloquial Welsh, in spoken Welsh, and we'll see a little bit of that in due course. Go away. Okay, so the triggers are mostly out and away the preceding lexical item, generally functional elements, including various prepositions, numerals, conjunctions, determiners, particles, and a whole shed load of stuff, and or the morphosyntactic context, and I'm going to illustrate those. So just very briefly, some lexical contexts. So the triggers are in bold, the mutated items underscored. So gan vlodin, that's just very typical, a preposition triggers soft mutation. Oh, I'm almost never talking about the other mutations, by the way. I'll point out anything that isn't soft mutation, but basically everything here is soft mutation. Gan bedwar blodin, so that shows that mutation targets always the initial element of the phrase, rather than say the head. Well, okay, that's a bit of a moot point. We'll come back to that actually. A numeral, that's a very typical situation as well. Okay. And then a whole sort of bunch of things. Paddiornod, which day, again, soft mutation, tenagothi, conjunctions. E is a little bit different, I guess. So this thing me is it's an affirmative particle, and you can have it in, you can leave it out. It tends to be quite common in speech, and again that triggers soft mutation. And F is a predicate marker, and that appears before adjectives and so forms adverbs, and that again triggers soft mutation. Okay, so those are the kind of the bread and butter, the straightforward cases. Then a little bit more sort of interesting, if you like, 1.2, the morphosyntactic context for mutation. So generally this involves various restrictions on what the target can be, and these restrictions, the ones I've illustrated, certainly concern gender and number. So in 3, we can see that a feminine singular noun undergoes soft mutation after the definite article. So cath is the radical form, and a gath. When it's plural in B, a cathod, there's no mutation. If you've got a masculine noun, it doesn't undergo any mutation. So the stoat, a carlum, is masculine. Doesn't make any difference whether it's masculine, whether it's singular or plural. No mutation after the definite article. In 4, we can see that after a feminine singular noun, each adjective in the string, if there's a string of adjectives, it gets soft mutation, no matter how many there are. So vaur from maur and vi from di, soft mutation. And you can also see in 4b that if the noun is plural, so a cathod, cats, the adjective doesn't mutate. No, none of the adjectives mutate. Okay, so again, sort of fairly straightforward and pretty well known. 1.3, I'm now sort of turning to purely structural conditions. So this time what we've got in 5 is an adjective that precedes the noun, and it doesn't make any difference whether that noun is feminine, like cat, or masculine, like stoat, carlon. It doesn't make any difference whether it's plural or singular. It's going to get soft mutation after a preceding modifier. So a preceding modifier triggers soft mutation on the following head. Yes, that's very well known. What I have suggested is that it's a bit more widespread than this. So the markedness hypothesis that I suggested way back when in the last century is that in any phrase, XP, that has an unmarked word order that's head initial, so X, the head, and alpha, some modifier, if the word order is as in 5, where the head is preceded by the modifier, then that head will bear soft mutation. So as in Celtic generally, the head initial order is unmarked, the head final order is marked. So the vast majority of adjectives always follow the noun, but some adjectives always precede, and the noun will get soft mutation. And actually, stylistically, you can put, I guess, any adjective before the noun, and the noun will get soft mutation. So not only does this concern adjectives and nouns like in 5, but it also concerns a bunch of other phrase types as well. So in 6a, we can see a sort of typical numeral followed by a noun. That's the unmarked order, and the noun doesn't mutate in this case. So num n is the unmarked word order. So let's assume that this is a num phrase and that the numeral is initial. If you switch those things around, well, a couple of things happen in 6b. So first of all, the noun, which normally doesn't get plural marking as typical in the Celtic languages, now we find the plural form of the noun in 6b. And because this is the marked word order, what happens now is that the numeral itself gets soft mutation. So that markedness hypothesis accounts for that. And this also happens in quantifier phrases. So flower din, many a man, so no mutation there. But in 7b, you've got a marked word order where men is now in the plural form. That's sort of irrelevant to the story, but it's like 6b. And now the quantifier gets soft mutation, so not flower, but lower. Okay. So, and then a section that's sort of very dear to my heart and has been for quite a long time, what I call syntactic soft mutation. So this stems from work mainly done with Bob Borsley, and we call it the XP trigger hypothesis. So if you read things about Welsh, and I'm sorry to say that this is in the Walls book, in fact, the Walls typology book, you tend to find the statement that direct objects get mutated in Welsh. And some people have attributed this to case, although modern Welsh doesn't actually have any case, certainly not the spoken language. So let me show you the kind of thing I'm talking about. And then we'll look at 8. So if you've got a typical VSO sentence like prynodd ddynas delyn, the object of that sentence is telling, and it gets soft mutation, as you can see. And as I said, people have suggested this is because it's a direct object. What I've argued, and what Bob and I have argued for a long time, is that actually this mutation, syntactic soft mutation, is triggered not because the word for harp is an object, but because there is an immediately preceding phrase of some kind. So hence the XP trigger hypothesis. So what is happening in 8, we argue, is that the subject of us is triggering the mutation of the object. And it doesn't have to be, crucially, an object that gets the mutation, as we'll see. So it can be an object to subject, it can be a verb phrase, and we'll see a few of those in a minute. So there's some very good reasons for saying that it's nothing to do with the objecthood of telling in 8. So one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to say that it's to do with objecthood is because the object does not get the mutation if it's fronted. So in 9, you've got a sort of mild focus there on the harp. So telling, rather than us, and there's no mutation. Okay. So it's still an object, but it's not an object in its normal position. If it's a sentence fragment, again, it's not going to get any mutation. So, you know, what did the woman buy? The answer will be telling with no mutation, and not delling with mutation. In 10, you've got, again, an example with the subject, the XP, that's the subject of us, triggering the mutation onto a verb phrase. So this is like a bit like do support in English, this kind of example. It's totally neutral. It doesn't have any particular sort of emphasis. It's just a different way of saying 8. But what you've got there is a verb phrase, which you can see it would be gwerthu, but the verb at the beginning of that verb phrase is getting the soft mutation there, again triggered by the subject. Another indication that objecthood is nothing to do with this mutation comes from the fact that if you have an auxiliary initial sentence like that in 11, so this is 11, the woman has bought a harp, telling, this is an overtly aspectual sentence. And the object is still telling, but it is not getting any mutation because there's no preceding XP, there's no phrase preceding it. It's the object of the verb buy, but there's no XP preceding it. So we think that does a lot better job than saying that direct objects mutate. And this also accounts for all sorts of other instances of soft mutation in Welsh in the same bundle. So the unmarked word order for something like there's a big dog in the garden is 12a. So my ci mawr and yr arth. And nothing get excuse me, I've I fear that this is going to be a recurring theme. I'm going to lose my voice. But if you switch the word order around, so I suppose you could say that it's some emphasis on the being in the garden here. Mae'n yr ardd gi mawr now. So what's happened here is we've just switched the word order around a bit, and that PP in the garden is now a trigger for soft mutation onto the following phrase, key. Okay. So all of this is accounted for by the XP trigger hypothesis. And that is about all I want to say about that. Obviously correct, of course. Okay. Still on kind of structural stuff and triggers and you know, just a general overview. One of the things which is possibly a bit different, I don't know, to the other Celtic languages, is that not all mutations have a trigger. So in 13, what we've got is a situation where you've got a fronted adjunct. So what you can see there is that it gets mutation, so it's ddwyflynydd yn ôl. And there's no trigger for that mutation other than the fact that it is an adjunct, and that's sort of pretty common, really. And there's, wherever they appear in a sentence, really, they tend to be mutated, although some speakers maybe don't mutate them in all circumstances, but anyway. The other thing, which again is sort of pretty general, is that you can actually suppress mutation. So there are various conditions under which you don't get the mutation that you would expect, and one of them is after a pause, and another situation is if you're kind of citing a title. So if you listen to the Welsh TV channel S4C, you find that they repeatedly say, introducing the soap opera Pobl y Cwm, they'll say nawr yn Pobl y Cwm, and in should trigger nasal mutation, but you don't get the nasal mutation on pobl there. So that contrasts with a sort of normal situation where you get and hobble, hobble, and so on in a sort of normal situation. So a citation like that, you don't expect mutation. And another thing which is very, very general in Welsh is that in 1.6, mutation often remains when the trigger is not overt, when the trigger's unrealized. So there are quite a bunch of functional elements in the colloquial language which people tend to drop. They can be there, but they don't have to be there in spoken Welsh. So what you see in 15 is an agreement proclitic. It's the thing in parentheses. It's the third person masculine singular agreement proclitic E. And it can be there, but it doesn't always appear in the colloquial language. But the mutation that it triggers, which is soft mutation, will typically remain. Okay. So unlike, I think, necessarily in Breton, where there are some counterexamples, in Welsh mutation is strictly local and only immediately preceding items are possible triggers. And we find that an important role actually for C command, that the mutated item is C commanded by the trigger. So if we take an example like the one I had before with a noun, garth, and a bunch of adjectives that follow it. So we already saw an example like 16, where you had a string of adjectives following a feminine singular noun, and each of them gets soft mutation as predicted. But if you say a large and busy garden, so you've got conjunction and in there, well, and triggers aspirate mutation, so you get fawr a frysur, because that's the immediately preceding item. You don't get brysur with soft mutation. So if you sort of assume a tree structure roughly like this, you can sort of imagine the percolation of the tree of the feminine singular features, where each adjective following the initial noun will undergo the soft mutation, as long as that initial noun is feminine and singular. I think occasionally people have suggested that this mutation of adjectives after feminine nouns is some kind of agreement, but mutation is actually not plausibly treated as morphological agreement of an adjective with a feminine singular noun, because as you can see in 19, so if you had a quite splendid garden where you've got an adjective phrase, tra champus, you can see that quite tra triggers aspirate mutation onto the following adjective, but tra itself gets soft mutation from the feminine singular noun garth. So the initial segment of the adjective phrase does indeed bear soft mutation, but it's not the adjective itself that bears soft mutation. So you've got like a string of triggers there. Okay. Okay. So that's basically, you know, a bunch of backgroundy stuff. And what I want to do now is to just talk about some oddities of mutation, because I think these are quite fun. So what you tend to find in a few words in Welsh is that, well, either you can have different radical forms, different forms that the dictionary will give you, or that speakers are not entirely sure what the radical form is. So a really, really common one is the word for promise. The verb, it should be other if you look it up in the dictionary, but people very commonly say gather. Why do they do that? Well, because they, I guess, perceive it as being a soft mutated form, having lost its g, and they put the g back. So it's some kind of reanalysis to restore a missing radical. Avo is correct, gather is not. There are places where, if you look it up in the dictionary, you get two different forms. So either benthyg or menthyg is borrow. They're both fine, and they both, under soft mutation, they both become the initial. So benthyg and menthyg both become benthyg. Another one that I like a lot is the form for worry, which is, it is Bexar, but that is clearly an English loan from vex, and people quite commonly say vexar, even in a, so as if it was the soft mutation form, even when it's not in a soft mutation context. Another quite fun one, I think. So Welsh has a couple of loan consonants, and what we tend to find is that these can undergo soft mutation as if they were part of the phonemic inventory of Welsh. So there are some quite well established loans in Welsh that begin with the loan consonant ch. So chine is one of them, the word for chain. And what you can see in 23, so if you've got never connect a rope or a chain, chine has undergone soft mutation following ne, the word for all, which is a soft mutation trigger, and it mutates and you get j, so jine. I think that one's quite fun. And then there's loanwords, and so established loans or nonce loans. So these are kind of pretty weird, really. The deal is that mutation can either destroy the phonology that you would originally find in the loanword, or it can create the phonology that you originally find in the loanword. So let's have a look first at some examples where soft mutation destroys the loanword. So 24, these are all well-established loans from English. Oh, I should have maybe said that the loans are all from English. What else? Where else would they be? So sort of very common, you get things like couple of boys, couple of boys, box Llanw tools, from tools, pre-ballerina, principal ballerina, where clearly balerinas should begin with a B. I like boycott. There's a typo there. So the bit in brackets should say boycottio, and I apologize from that. So boycottio is indeed the loan word, but in a soft mutation context, you get boycottio. So the preposition to, triggers soft mutation, and that clearly ruins the loan word phonology. Passport, again, loan word from English, and having it following a soft mutation trigger like da, your, destroys the loan word phonology. On the other hand, you can get instances where soft mutation will actually create the loan word phonology. So the word for honest is gonast, but in a soft mutation context, it becomes honest. So that creates the loan word phonology, so that's good. And then things like venture, the English loan venture is mentra, and its soft mutation form sounds more like venture. It's ventra with a V, that's good. The loan word for advantage or vantage is mantis, and the soft mutation form is vantis. So that, again, vantis is clearly, better, more like the English. So those are quite cool, I think. What I like even better, and then there are probably quite a lot actually of situations where a loan word has different forms in different dialects. So the word for damp, sorry, I'm drinking so I don't disappear altogether. In North Wales, the loan is tamp, but the soft mutation form is damp. And in South Wales, the loan is damp, and the soft mutation form is vamp. Why? Well, it just is the way it is. And then these are my favorite kind of things. So I really like nonce loans or nonce-ish loans. So some of these are probably sort of relatively common, but they're not in the dictionary, basically. So, and they will undergo mutation just as if they were a native word, basically. So date undergoes soft mutation in 27A, date. This one in B, profile E. So there is a Welsh loan profile, which is a sort of standard loan, but this isn't it. This is definitely the English word profile, but it's undergone nasal mutation after the word for my. I really like the one in 27. Oh, I see, I've got two C's. Anyway, the first one, you never see typos till you're actually giving the talk, right? So the first C, and baggage. So this, again, baggage is not a loan, a standard loan at all. It's a nonce loan. And this should undergo a nasal mutation, as in B, but actually it's pretty common to get soft mutation after the word for my. So unvaggage, I really like that one. That's a cool one. Mechanic is not the standard word for mechanic in Welsh, but there you can see that that's a loan of mechanic, and it's undergone soft mutation. Okay. Another thing which I think is sort of pretty cool, I don't know how many of these there are, but people tend to quite often sort of maybe don't realize that something's already mutated and they'll mutate it again. So the word for ready or prepared is parod, and in its soft mutation form, it should be barod, but you quite commonly get things like 28 to in barod. I'm ready, or I'm prepared, where you've got actually a double mutation, a soft mutation of a soft mutated form already. That one I think is sort of pretty common actually, but if you kind of dig around, you can find others. So it's been voting day this week, yesterday in my country, and the word for vote is pleidleisio, and its soft mutation form is pleidleisio, but you do find examples where it's, again, you've mutated the mutated form, pleidleisio. Okay. And then sort of finally for this section, there's, I don't know how many there are, but of this, but you do tend to get things like in 29b, the word for bird is aderin. It's pretty common to knock off the first syllable, so to get derin, but it shouldn't mutate because it's a masculine noun. But you do find that aderin. And in 29a, the word for a cup of tea or whatever is derived from a standard loan, cupanide, cuppa, but again, the first syllable's lost. And actually, this is a standard word in Welsh for a cup of something, panad, and it's undergone mutation, which, as you can see, sort of again ruins the loan. So there's a cup in there somewhere, right, from the English cupan, but mutating it has destroyed the loanword phonology. But it really is a feminine noun, so that's quite cool, I think. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the remaining time is talk about mutation and the definite article. So I think I've got about 10 minutes, given that we started late. There are three forms of the definite article, three allomorphs, and they are sh, and and they occur in the environments laid out in 30. So before vowel initial, H initial, and glide initial words, before a consonant initial word, and then the enclitic forms, sh, occur after a vowel final word, no matter what the next word is. So, or, avon. And basically what happens is that the sh form is a phonological enclitic, and it cliticizes onto any preceding vowel final word. So I'm not going to go through 31, but it just basically shows you a whole bunch of things that sh, the definite article, can criticize to, as long as it follows a vowel of some kind. So it doesn't matter whether it's a copular or an infinitive or a noun or a pronoun, that sh can criticize to it. Actually, I'm going to shut up for 2 seconds to have a drink, and you can look at those. Okay. So sh takes precedence over the other two forms because it doesn't care what follows it, it only cares what precedes it. It also takes precedence, the enclitic form sh also takes precedence when you find it with morphemes which themselves have consonant final and vowel final alternants. So there's the word for with is gida, but that word also has a consonant final allomorph, which you can see in 32b. So gidag before a vowel, gida before a consonant. Okay. So what happens when you put that word gida together with the definite article? what you find is that the enclitic form of the definite article takes precedence. So it's gyda'r nod in 33A and not gydag okay. And in 33B, it's gyda'r offer with the equipment and not gydag okay. Now it was shown actually a very long time ago by a guy called Richard Coates that it's really quite difficult in the sort of standard phonological assumptions of the, I suppose, the 1980s to actually work out what the underlying form of the definite article is, because whatever you do, it never really works given standard phonological assumptions. But we'll see a solution. So it is truly the case generally that enclitic forms are chosen whenever their structural descriptions met. But even though you might expect that to be always the case, well, it really actually isn't always the case. So there's an enclitic form of the predicate marker, which is indicated by apostrophe N. And that enclitic form does not win out when there is an alternative consonant final allomorph. So if you look at 34, you might expect to find the enclitic form of the predicate marker following na, the negative, or a, the conjunction and, but that's not what you get. Instead, the allomorph of nor and nag and ag win out. So crucially, the precedence of sh doesn't simply follow from the fact that it's an enclitic. So what I proposed in a paper with S.J. Hanners some years ago is the following situation where you've got a lexical entry with not one form but two for the definite articles. So this relies on the elsewhere condition, and essentially what we've suggested here is that sh is takes precedence because under the elsewhere condition the more specific form always applies first. So sh takes precedence, it occurs after any vowel, and then the other two forms and will apply elsewhere with their allomorphy depending on the following segments. So that's the proposal. Okay, so this is the final page. So the cool thing, I think, is that let's scroll down a bit. So there's a strange and possibly unexpected kind of interaction between mutation and the choice of the and forms of the article. So what you can see in 36, so you've got two feminine singular nouns. So as we already know, you get soft mutation after a feminine, you get soft mutation of a feminine singular noun after the definite article. So 36A, all as expected. Glois is the word for pain, and the word for the pain, the way of saying the pain is lois, no problem. Garth is feminine singular noun. And what happens there is that this also gets soft mutation after the definite article. Now, this is the weird bit. Occurs not only before nouns which are canonically vowel initial, like avon, but also before nouns in which the initial vowel results from mutation. Now, isn't that weird? The post-mutation form of the noun determines the form of the article, but the article triggers the mutation. So we have a paradox. The mutation garth to arth, soft mutation, is triggered by the preceding article, but the correct form of the article, or can't be chosen unless the initial segment of the noun is known, which in turn depends on whether or not mutation has occurred. So that's the paradox. So what we suggested was a staggered lexical insertion following some work of Joe Emmons, in which content words are inserted before functional elements into the derivation. So the idea is that the soft mutation is triggered by an as yet unfilled definite article slot, and the article is inserted later in its correct form, since it can now see the initial segment of the noun. So if you take something like the ararth, the garden, the proposed derivation would be, so number one, insertion of the content word. That's the proposal content words inserted first. Number two, triggering of the mutation following an as yet unfilled determiner slot. And then number three, insertion of the article in its correct form, because it can now see the vowel that follows. And there is, you'll be happy to hear, independent support for this. So we already saw earlier that it was commonplace for certain functional elements to be unrealized. And there are a bunch of these, but the mutation that they trigger typically remains. So in Welsh, unfilled slots that trigger various mutations really are independently needed. And moreover, unfilled slots block an overt preceding item from triggering some other mutation, which to me is good evidence that they truly exist. So here's a nice example. In our house, there's a standard way of saying it, an ni. The word for our, it's the second one in, the one spelled EIN, triggers no mutation, but in triggers nasal mutation. Okay, now common colloquial usage, you get deletion of the word for our, and even though it's not there, you do not get the nasal mutation form of house. So the correct version is 39A and not 39B. So if you had that, that will be incorrect. You can compare it with C. And I think, so the conclusion is that slots for functional words must be present throughout the derivation, whether or not they're overtly filled. And that is all I actually want to say. There is an appendix which you can play with if you've got the handout in your own time. And I think that's all I want to do. Oh, that timing was pretty perfect. I finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. We have, there are questions here. Am I supposed to do this, or is one of the students doing this?
You do it.
Okay, there's a bunch from me, and then there's some from others, but I'm going to let the other people go first. So Andrew Zupan, you have a question, right? You want to ask it?
Sure, I'll ask. So you mentioned the mutations with the loan phonology from English with the chain case. I'm curious if I don't know if there are any studies of this, if in conjuncts like you showed, if speakers tend to prefer a conjunct order that would move the loan phoneme initial word out of the mutation context. If you give speakers that rope and chain case, maybe do you know if they would prefer to put chain in a context where it wouldn't mutate as opposed to after?
No, I mean, native speakers are happy to mutate anything, anywhere. I mean, the nonce mutations, I think, really show that. I mean, I don't know of any cases where anybody ever sort of wishes not to mutate, if you know what I mean. If it can mutate, it will mutate. Native, loan.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Andrew, why don't you go next?
And actually, that was a perfect lead-in for my question. I'm curious about the difference between borrowing and code switching, because we know that speakers of Celtic languages code switch massively. And when I'm thinking about, particularly about the nonce borrowings that you were talking about, and the effect, I'm curious, this seems to be a mutation in the middle of a constituent, which would argue against it being code switching. Right?
Yeah, these are not, those weren't really code switched examples. I mean, they were just nonce-loans, really. So, yeah.
How can you tell the difference between a...
Well, because I think, if it was code switching, you'd expect more than just the one, if it's just basically a nonce-loan of a noun or a verb, that's really, really common.
So do you ever find mutation within an obviously code switched environment?
Probably not, because then the trigger would be in English, right? So if the trigger, because you need the trigger to be in Welsh. So what would trigger? There wouldn't be a trigger.
Oh, I'm just thinking about the cases which I found in Gaelic, where they actually seem to be code switching mid-constituent, which is surprising.
Yeah.
They'll use a Gaelic preposition followed by an English word, and then it continues in English after that.
Right. So if you had a Welsh preposition, yeah, okay. Well, then what would be the difference, I guess, between a nonce-loan and that? It would mutate. It would mutate. If it could mutate, it would mutate for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a bunch of questions, but they're little questions. So the first question is pub. Why doesn't it mutate? That is, why does it not cause mutation? It's pub, every, each, whatever that is. Yeah.
Oh, there's a complete randomness of what lexical items are mutation triggers for what. Oh, I see. I think I see what you're asking. Yeah.
I guess I'm just saying, if it's about its syntax, then maybe that's not an adjective like pri.
No, it isn't. It isn't an adjective like thing, and it doesn't. It's not a mutation trigger, and it's not an adjective.
So the syntax of something like pobdin is different from the syntax of privdin.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then here's another one of the same sort. So you cite priv valerina, which is lovely. But then you can also, I assume that's a briv valerina, right?
Yeah.
So I was always puzzled by, but maybe your story has an answer. That is, so priv valerina is clearly feminine, and yet the P does not mutate. But
it would after the definite article. Yeah.
It does after the definite article.
Yeah.
So the definite article case actually kind of makes sense. My question is, when the definite article is not there, maybe your story is an answer for why you don't say briv valerina.
Because there's no, because there's no trigger.
Yeah.
There's no trigger. There's
so
nothing.
the standard story about it being just feminine adjectives, that's not going to get that difference, but your story would.
This is accounted for perfectly well in traditional grammars. It's, if the adjective follows the noun, then it's going to get mutation. If it precedes the noun, it's only going to get mutation if it follows a definite article.
Right.
So this isn't really anything to do with me or anything I've said. This is just a standard way of looking at adjectives and nouns.
Okay. I had one more. Well, let me just make sure. Is there anybody else here that I'm eclipsing? No, then I'll ask my other one. So you cite I went looking for these myself, these barod cases, and I've not been successful at I've been searching through Twitter for double mutation examples. But I'm wondering if, as I read the example, I just thought it just seemed like, how to put it, that if I say doing varod, that must mean I'm really ready.
Don't think so.
So
I
it
mean,
just, it's just,
honestly, I mean, honestly, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I mean, I think I don't know if there are native speakers in the room, but I mean, it's a slip basically, but it's a very common one, I think.
okay.
I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay.
I'm willing to be corrected.
There's another question here. I think somebody named Christopher, you want to ask your question? Are you there? Oh, okay. Well, it's in the chat, so I'll read it. Related to Andrew's questions, you mentioned that mutation is strictly local in Welsh, as opposed to maybe Breton or Irish. There are examples of native speaker mutation occurring non-locally, at least on the surface, in phrases with expletives borrowed from English. I have to read this. Okay. Dwi isio kickio fo. Yeah, both. Oh, I'm gonna. Maggie, do you see it in the chat?
No.
Oh shit. Oh, I mean, darn. Okay, Dwi isio kickio fo fucking hath. So it looks like, va and then the expletive fucking.
Well,
and
no,
then
I mean that's
that's
expected. That's just totally expected, because what you've got there is an adjective. So fucking's an adjective preceding the noun, so that's expected.
No, it's nasal mutation on the adjective.
Oh, nasal mutation. Oh, nasal. Oh, well, okay, that's weird. I mean, sorry, I'm just gonna quietly choke here. You made me laugh, which wasn't good. Sorry. I've become I really apologize for this. I'm a lot better than I was this morning, but I'm becoming speechless. Yeah, I don't have an explanation for that at all. I didn't know about that. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I would expect soft mutation.
Yeah.
Anybody want to?
I've never seen that.
I mean, I've never heard it, but I'm willing to believe anything,
Nice. There's a couple of other observations here, and then we probably should close off. So one from the nice man whose first name I can't pronounce.
Kuven.
That man. Do you want to make your observation yourself? He observed, okay, he's shaking his head. Thank you. He's observing that you do get double mutation in Gaelic. T turning into D. Huh. Okay. Then there's another, not a problem, understood. There's an observation from David. David, you want to speak up?
Yeah, sure. This was just really a continuation of the previous discussion. When we were doing the field work for the Syntactic Atlas of Welsh Dialects, one of the questions had dal still in it. And some speakers, not all of them, but some of them treated it as though it wasn't there for calculating mutation. So in the example I just put in the chat, mana dal driarol, na is a soft mutation. Na there would trigger soft mutation.
Okay, wait. I hadn't got that open. Okay. I was trying to Madal tree. Okay. Well, wait a minute.
If you don't have the dal there, nobody puts a sorry, if you don't have the na there, nobody puts a mutation on tree. So you can say madal.
Nobody puts a mutate. Really? Nobody would mutate madal tree. Really?
That seemed to be what we were finding.
I'm really surprised about that. I would have thought that the dal. I mean, I really am surprised by that. I would have thought that that it.
Dal doesn't. It's not thou.
No, dal itself appears to be immune to mutation. That's like, you're right, Mike. That's another weird thing about this example is it's dal, not tal. So a na is a trigger, but it doesn't trigger a mutation on dal. So you just treat dal as though it's not there. It's both immune to being mutated and it doesn't stop a mutation.
I guess the trouble is with dal is that it's kind of unique, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
not
it's
very
unique.
many things that you can really compare it to, and maybe that is the reason for it.
I think there's a bit of uncertainty that's also there. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
consistent.
So I wonder if, would this be analogous? This goes going back to Christopher's question. He had kick yo fucking hath. What if you had something like kick yo the bloody hath? In other words, would the bloody not go into bloody?
Well,
And then the hath still give the nasal one. That would be an analogous case to the dal.
bloody's an established loan, and it would get nasal. I mean, it should get nasal mutation, but I mean, part of the problem there is that I'm really sorry, but I really am losing my voice now. The my does for many people trigger soft mutation anyway, but it should trigger nasal mutation. But I mean, Fymlydi, I don't see a problem with Fymlydi at all. I mean, I don't know. I haven't done the work. I don't know if David knows, but you know, I can imagine Fymlydi perfectly happily. But it is an established loan.
Okay, I mean, I think we're well past our time. Let us thank our speaker again.
Okay, you're very well. I mean, thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you. And I should before we go, I'll just alert people, the presentation next week is at the ungodly American hour of 8 a.m. Arizona time. For you Europeans, it will be, you know, something far more leisurely. But anyway, next week at 8. And thank you again, Maggie.
Thank you, and goodbye. Bye, folks.
Get in the mouth, go, I'm the